Hi, this is Teddy. Today's episode is about Nebraska. Here are some facts about Nebraska. Nebraska is the 37th most populous state with nearly 2 million people. The capital of Nebraska is Lincoln, and the largest city is Omaha. The governor of Nebraska is Republican Pete Ricketts. The senators are Republicans Deb Fischer and Ben Sasse. Nebraska sends 3 representatives to the U.S. House of Representatives. All Republicans. Wait, that stinks! Bye.
Hi, everyone. This is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. I am here right now with Jane Kleeb, who is the chair of the Nebraska Democratic Party, and we're talking all about the politics of Nebraska. Hi, Jane.
Hey, thanks for having me today.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So the first thing that may surprise people is that there's a Nebraska Democratic Party.
Yes, this is true.
And so I guess my first question is, when we look at Nebraska, when we think about Nebraska, we think about it as such a very Republican red state. And I'm wondering, to what extent that's just perception and to what extent, it sort of is that way. What is the state of the Democratic Party within Nebraska right now?
Yeah. So, when people do think of Nebraska, you probably think of Husker football and corn. Those are two usually kind of, symbols and synonymous with our state. And I don't think anybody thinks Democrat when you hear Nebraska. But the reality is we have a very populous and independent streak in our state. And we have a lot of Democratic officials who've held statewide and federal office. Senator Ben Nelson, Senator Bob Kerrey, Lieutenant Governor Roback. And so, from our perspective, we really try to remind voters, and this is one of the big things we're doing this election cycle, that we actually do have the power to elect Democrats. This year, we have over 820 Democrats running on the ballot across the state of Nebraska, which is mind-blowing. The largest number that we know of in our history is about 500. So we are almost doubling that number. And we're one of those states that passed minimum wage long before anybody else did on the ballot. So voters did that as a voter initiative. We have Medicaid expansion on the ballot as a voter initiative this cycle. We gave Dreamers licenses and access to college tuition at the same rate as Nebraska-born kids long before anybody else was doing that. We've stopped the Keystone XL pipeline. So there's lots of examples on issues where Nebraskans really lead on a very progressive path. Our problem has been candidates being able to vocalize and represent those issues on the ballot.
So one of the things that is so unique about Nebraska is the unicameral legislature at the state level. Can you talk a little bit about how that works and what that means for elections?
Yeah, so we do have this great body, the unicameral. So we don't have a House and a Senate. We just have one body. We call all of our elected officials at the unicameral state senators, and they represent 49 districts across the state. Right now, we have everybody really knows who the Democrats and Republicans are as state senators. So we do have 15 Democrats elected right now out of 49, which seems, I know, awful and low. The good news is I think we have the ability to pick up at least 4 to 6 seats if the blue wave really does come together like we're all hoping and working hard to make happen. You could see as many as 8. So definitely hitting at least the 20 mark. And then I think in another 2 years when the other half of the seats are up, I think we could get up to 25. So the trend lines are definitely working in our favor. We keep on putting up state legislative candidates who really look and sound like their communities instead of what I think our party was doing before. It was like, unless you were an old white guy who had a law degree, you couldn't run for state legislature in our state. And definitely people have broken out of that mold this year.
You mentioned the blue wave. Are you finding a lot of interest in the Democratic Party this year? The past 2 years, are a lot of people joining and getting involved?
Yeah, so there's some clear indications that the blue wave is definitely happening. I think one, with the amount of candidates that we have running, over 820 is just phenomenal. And they literally are all from all over the state. And so one would assume that the vast majority of them would be in kind of the Omaha and Lincoln area. Those are our two biggest cities where essentially the vast majority of Dems live. But we have folks running all over the state in small kind of Republican-leaning districts, even in western Nebraska. So we're proud of that, and we're making sure as a party that we're supporting those candidates by sending out slate cards that list every single Democrat by county to every single Democratic household. That's the first time our party has ever done that. It's really going to help our down ballot candidates that are, quote unquote, nonpartisan on the ballot. So sometimes Democrats don't even vote for those or pick the name that they think sounds better because they don't know who the Democrat is. So this year they'll know who the Democrat is. And then the other indication, I think, from my perspective, is this new program we have in place called the Block Captain. So we have over 550 volunteer block captains all across the state, and they are knocking their neighbors' doors. They're given 50 houses of Democrats who live around them. So it's streets and names and houses that they recognize and know. And we train them and give them materials for each of those canvases. So they canvass those houses anywhere from 2 to 3 times before Election Day. And that's working out just truly amazing, right? And in any other year, I think we probably could have gotten maybe 50 or 100 people to sign up. But the fact that we have over 550, it's really an indication, I think, of people being excited.
What are the kinds of issues that people in Nebraska are really concerned with right now? What are the kinds of issues that your state legislature and local candidates are running on?
As chair, it's really important, and I know a lot of my other fellow state party chairs do this as well, is that we're not just sitting in an office looking at kind of, voter spreadsheets, but that we're out there doing the hard work of knocking doors and talking to voters as well. So I knock lots of doors every week, and the issues are pretty consistent, whether you're in a small rural town or an urban city. First and foremost, because it's on the ballot, people are definitely talking about Medicaid expansion and about wanting to move that forward and making sure that we have affordable health insurance. Some Dems talk about Medicare for all at the door. Some, certainly talk about just having affordable health insurance for everybody. But Medicaid expansion is definitely hot on the list. We have an issue of property taxes in Nebraska that I know, may not be the top of issues in other states, but it is a big issue here. It's how we fund our public schools, and it's just gotten so out of whack. And so you have some farmers and ranchers who are already living on razor-thin margins, paying $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year in taxes. They're literally having to take out loans to pay property taxes. So it's a big problem and a big issue that Republicans always run on lowering, and then they literally do nothing. And then I think, the third one is immigration. So I think people would probably assume that Nebraskans are anti-immigrant and, follow Donald Trump's ridiculous line about building a wall. It's really at the absolute complete opposite here. The agricultural community in our state relies and depends and embraces immigrant workers. The state would close down without immigrant workers here. So we really want to see a solution to that, a path to citizenship, just like Reagan did in the 80s, and make sure that it's humane moving forward. So those are some of the big ones.
So I know you have an interesting backstory yourself. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about what your background is, how you got involved in the State Democratic Party?
Yeah. So I was actually born and raised in Florida and then lived in Philly and Washington, D.C. I was the executive director of the Young Democrats of America from 2003 to late 2006. And during that time is when my husband, Scott Kleeb, he's a cattle rancher, was running as a young Dem. So I got to know Scott, through the Young Democrats of America, and then really got to come out to Nebraska to visit and try to help get Scott elected when he was running in 2006, and really fell in love with the state. We have a beautiful part of our state called the Sandhills, which is this intact, really beautiful ecoregion with wildlife and cattle and clean water. There's no pipelines. So, when Scott didn't make it across the finish line, I was a single mom at the time. He asked me to marry him. So Cora and I moved to our beautiful state of Nebraska. And really about a year after I moved here is when the Keystone XL pipeline started to become a major issue. And I had started a group called Raybould, which was working on progressive issues from passing healthcare reform and other big kind of issues like immigration in our state. But Keystone has obviously dominated my life for almost the past 10 years. And it's still an issue now where we're still, alongside farmers, ranchers, environmentalists, and tribal nations in our state. We've been able to stop Keystone, and we have lots of legal paths to continue to stop it. But, I wasn't always a Democrat. I wasn't always somebody who would have called herself a progressive, but I've always been somebody who's always been working in the streets on issues and working, on making sure that regular people felt part of the political process. And so moving to Nebraska was, my friends in DC thought it was going to be this like earth-shattering like culture shock, but folks in Nebraska live up to their name of Nebraska nice. One of the best things about working on the pipeline or even working in Democratic politics, especially when I go to rural communities, I'm always leaving with fresh eggs or meat or some other produce product that people have grown. So it's a pretty good gig.
Is there anything else that you would like people to know about Nebraska or about the Democratic Party in Nebraska?
I think one thing that is important for me is that, sometimes in our Democratic politics, when we're talking about strategy, about how are we going to turn out voters, and I feel like for the past several years, it's been very data driven, right? Like we're going to use this data driven voter model, and we're not going to, think about the heart that goes into politics. And in all of the years that I've been involved in politics, people really do follow their gut when it comes to politics. It's a very emotional decision to go in the ballot box and do one of the most sacred rights that we have, which is to vote for somebody. And so when we're working with candidates and when we're talking to voters, we really talk about the issues that people have gut emotional connection and reactions to. And as Democrats, especially those of us who are working in rural and in red states, we have a responsibility to talk about issues like property rights, which is not something that usually comes out of the mouth of Democrats, but is a big issue for us in an agricultural state where you have pipelines just wanting to go wherever they want. So I really challenge all of us, as Democrats to not ignore the red states, right? Definitely continue to give to our swing states and our blue states, but really start to look at candidates in these red states that if they've been given a chance and if they have the small grassroots donations, they too can win.
That's been one of the best things about doing this podcast is getting to see what strong Democrats there are in places like Nebraska and Idaho and places people don't think about having strong Democratic parties.
If you're a Democrat in a red and a rural state, you're a Democrat. So it's like you have a pretty thick skin and a pretty firm backbone, and you can back up your ideas and policy stances.
For our listeners who are in Nebraska, how could they get involved in things like the block captains if they'd like to?
If you go to nebraskademocrats.org, you can sign up to be a block captain. You can also see the list of all the Democratic candidates running. We will soon have digital slate cards online as well that you'll be able to download and bring with you into the ballot box, although every single Democrat will also get one in the mail.
Excellent. We'll put links for that up on our website as well. So, Jane, thank you so much for talking to me. This is really exciting. I think it's so thrilling that there are such great organizational structures for Democrats in so many places. And I just love hearing how many people are running this year. That is really exciting.
It's exciting. Thanks for helping us tell the story.
CleanTheHouse.org was started by 3 generations of a family saddened and angered by the daily onslaught of Trump administration outrages and the complicity of Republicans in Congress. Together, the family formed a plan to turn the House blue. Researching the districts considered toss-ups or leaning Democratic, they identified 36 districts that together can take back the House. Through Act Blue, they made it easy to donate to all 36 districts in one swoop. For as little as $36, you can give $1 to each of these districts. Visit cleanthehouse.org and follow at cleanthehouse18 on Facebook and Twitter. Help support these 36 districts and tell everyone you know to do the same. Let's clean the house this November. Visit cleanthehouse.org because you give $1. I'm here in this segment with Jane Raybould, who is running for the U.S. Senate from Nebraska. Hi, Jane.
Hello.